Okay, welcome to the webinar, Foundations of Strength, Gender Protection and Livelihoods. Good conversation going on today with our panelists, who I'm going to introduce here. We have Tenza Manel, the Senior Program Officer for Livelihoods and Emergencies at the Women's Refugee Commission. She's focused on implementing safe, market-based livelihood recovery programs. We have Jara Mohammed, the Program Officer for Livelihoods at Nursery Car. She's an expert in livelihoods, particularly in northern Nigeria. We have Michael Mwazu, who is a Livelihoods Project Officer in Nigeria, also with Mercy Corps. Jude Powell joins us. She's the Global Emergency Food Security and Vulnerable Livelihoods Advisor. She's joining us from Oxfam. She provides technical support to Oxfam's Global Livelihoods programs. Corey Sissons, finally, is the Emergency Food Security and Vulnerable Livelihoods Coordinator at Oxfam. She was based in Erbil, Iraq, where she managed cash and voucher livelihood and food assistance for the Iraq program. So I'm going to hand this over to Tenzin to begin the show.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning to all. Thank you to all of our participants who have tuned in today, to our donor, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, to our partners and panelists from Mercy Corps and Oxfam. The Women's Refugee Commission is a research and advocacy organization, and we're dedicated to protecting the rights of refugee women and girls, as well as other vulnerable groups, including their rights to sexual and reproductive health care, an environment free from gender-based violence, and economic and social empowerment. At Women's Refugee Commission, we research needs, identify solutions, advocate for programs and policies, and provide technical assistance to field projects as well. The goals of today's webinar are to improve the effectiveness of livelihoods programming, to save you all, our audience, from learning the hard way, to avoid negative unintended consequences of our interventions. And we invite the audience to share with us learning as they explore and utilize the tools which we'll be sharing with you today. WRC is available to provide technical assistance, both in using the resources as well as with other projects. In crisis, communities are displaced and households lose their assets, creating new vulnerabilities. Within households, women, men, girls, and boys experience these vulnerabilities differently as they're equipped with different assets based on gender norms, which of course differ in each context. While well-intentioned, livelihoods interventions are not neutral. They can either benefit individuals or create vulnerabilities. As humanitarians, in the face of urgency, it's important that we not just do something, but we ensure that our interventions do no harm. And we need to get our interventions right from day one. This is Dila. Dila is a trader in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. 20 years ago, she lost her husband and her 2 sons in Saddam Hussein's Anfal campaign. Since then, she's been fending for herself, defying traditional norms for women in KRI, and she trades commodities for women customers. She serves women who can't easily access the market themselves, and she's found that selling items for women means that men don't come by her shop, which is also her home, so she feels safer. When the conflict with ISIS began, the road to the market was blocked. Now she has to access a new market, which is farther away, where she doesn't have linkages to vendors. Dila faces many risks. She's sexually harassed at checkpoints, has to build suppliers and creditor relationships anew, and she fears that her goods might be stolen along the way home. Dila protects herself by traveling first thing in the morning, and whenever possible, she travels to the market with her sister's husband. He has vouched for her and her new creditors. Dila sees herself as a role model for other women in her community who want to participate in income-generating activities. Gender risk analysis identifies the risks faced by communities with respect to gender relations and identities, and increases the visibility of these risks and indicates specific needs and targeting actions. In the livelihoods community, we're very good at livelihoods assessments and analysis, and often we try to integrate gender and protection analysis and assessments as well, but we often fail to do these things in consort, ensuring integrated livelihoods, gender, and protection analysis. The benefits and liabilities of an intervention are context and gender specific. New economic opportunities for women often result in new risks. Engaging women in economic activities can create pathways for empowerment as well as resilience, but can also heighten their exposure to risks, including gender-based violence, as we heard in Dila's story. These risks can be mitigated in program planning through ongoing gender risk analysis. And what we want to see as a community in all of our actions is integrated livelihoods, gender, and protection analysis. With support from OFDA in 2014, the Women's Refugee Commission released a learning document following a year-long research project on current practices of gender risk analysis in livelihoods programming. Our findings identified two critical gaps. The first, that gender risk analysis is often overlooked in humanitarian response, and the second, that practitioners lack targeted tools to capture risks associated with livelihoods, and in particular, gender-based violence. With release of this report, WRC shared the draft of the CLARA tool, the Cohort Livelihoods and Risk Analysis tool. And over the last year and a half, the Women's Refugee Commission has been piloting and revising the CLARA based on lessons learned in the field. We've conducted pilots in Iraq, Nigeria, and South Sudan. The CLARA has been developed for two audiences. First, for field-level livelihoods practitioners who assess, design, and monitor emergency and early recovery livelihoods interventions, and second, for HQ staff as well as donors who are responsible for institutionalizing as well as enforcing gender risk analysis through appropriate policies, procedures, and practice. So we've been talking about the CLARA. What is it? The CLARA approach is to assess livelihoods risks and community-based protection strategies, utilizing focus group discussions and interviews, to mitigate risks identified through protective program design, including strengthening community-based protection strategies, to leverage monitoring and community mobilization, things which all humanitarian actors do and can facilitate ongoing gender risk analysis, as well as to adapt design and operations for safety and inclusion of all. CLARA is applicable across emergency settings as well as phases of the emergency. CLARA can inform program design, be used to monitor implementation and outcomes, as well as ensure there are no negative unintended consequences from our interventions, as well as highlight needed program correction. CLARA guidance outlines step-by-step instructions to promote safer gender-sensitive livelihoods. The 4 steps are secondary data review, primary data collection, utilizing the CLARA tools, which are modular. The 3rd step is data analysis and program design, and the 4th is implementation and monitoring. The CLARA tools have been developed to execute step 2, primary data collection. The following CLARA tools are available: focus group discussion tools, interview tools, as well as a logic tool for training facilitators. All of these tools are available in editable form in English, Arabic, and French, and both in adolescent and adult versions. Together, this suite of tools equips programmers with the information they need to design safe livelihoods interventions that take into consideration the different needs, risks, and protection strategies of women, men, girls, and boys. Also, the information needed to monitor risks identified and to inform adaptations as needed for the safety and inclusion of all. By capturing the perspectives of cohorts and subpopulations, program teams can best understand the nuances of risks in each context, including community attitudes, dynamics, awareness, and behavioral factors, which cannot be preconceived. You've noticed by now that these tools are qualitative, and they are so in order to best capture the nuances of risks, in particular gender-based violence risk within each context. These qualitative tools can be paired with quantitative tools in order to bridge gaps in gender protection and livelihoods analysis. They can either be standalone or integrated with existing tools, for example, the EMMA, as well as the 48-hour tool. and these tools can be used at any stage of the program cycle. I mentioned earlier that they're modular, and so they can be pulled from as needed and adapted as appropriate to context, changing phrases and probing. I'm now going to pass to my colleague Corey at Oxfam, who will share with us a bit of our pilot together in Iraq.
At the time of planning and doing the CLARA, we were just doing some emergency programming, so we had some distributions of winter kits, a bit of cash, and we realised that this crisis is not going away. There's not so much of a food security issue; it's more of a livelihoods issue. So we knew that we wanted to do some livelihoods assessments at some point. And actually, Oxfam at a global level has a partnership with Women's Refugee Commission, so to pilot this tool. So we thought that actually Iraq would be a great place to do that, because we only had very basic kind of rapid data. We didn't really have much data about livelihoods, but we did also know that there were quite complex gender protection issues. Some of the gender roles are quite set in stone. We tried to get women involved in some of our activities, but it was really difficult. So we knew that we had to understand much better the gender dynamics and the power dynamics to be able to do better livelihoods programming.
Yeah, this is Corey again. So in this context, Oxfam had actually secured UNDP funding for a livelihood programme. So we'd already submitted a proposal, but we decided between programme proposal submission and actually starting the project itself in August 2015, in the summer of 2015, in June and July, that we'd undertake this CLARA assessment. And in the hope that it could inform programme and project design. So this, there's an overview on that slide of that project. So it was a 9-month project which targeted 1,120 households in the Governorate, and particularly in the parts that are disputed. And it had 4 main elements, and they were cash for work, livestock, income generation, and small businesses. And I'm just going to maybe pass over to Jude, who's going to talk a little bit about the methodology for the CLARA Pilot and a bit about how that kind of went. So I wasn't actually there, unfortunately, so Tenzin, do add in if there's anything. But what the CLARA tool itself divides beneficiaries or participants into the different cohort groups: men, women, girls, and boys. But because we were doing, we wanted to look a bit deeper at some of the livelihoods issues. Then we also did some extra questioning around different livelihood groups. So I think we had farmers and traders and business people. And then we would ask we'd ask the same questions to each of those groups. So actually it ended up that I think there might have been 10 or 12 groups in each community. And it probably took a couple of days for each community to go through all of the questions. So it's fairly time consuming, but did mean that we actually got quite rich data. And also, at the longer, as time went on, then the people doing the surveys obviously got better at probing and asking more questions to actually get to the information that we needed. Shall I move on to the key findings? So if you can move to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So I mean, some of the things that we found that were sort of a bit surprising, I think, that that we might not have found out if we were just doing our normal types of surveys. And the first one is about that we assume that when a conflict happens, that actually post-conflict or during the crisis, the risks are actually going to be higher for different groups. But what we actually found out here, and we got this from talking to the boys who were shepherding the animals, is that actually they felt safer post-conflict because they were now only under the Kurdish control rather than kind of, because they're in the disputed territories, a bit of Iraqi control and a bit of Kurdish
patrol. So they actually said that they felt safer. Another piece of information which we found out from talking to the women, which we didn't necessarily have a good understanding of, and Tenzin touched on this before, is around women's access to markets, and the fact that when they're if they are working or trading at home, they have their own social networks, and there's certain traders that they can trade with and buy from. And once they were displaced, that was blocked to them. They wouldn't be able to trade, they wouldn't be able to go and find new traders, new suppliers themselves. They needed introducing from male members of their family or other male members of the community. And if they didn't have those networks, it would really severely restrict their access to markets. One of the, as Oxfam, we do try to include as many voices as possible, but we tend not to, as standard, talk to boys and girls separately. And I think we had to persuade the communities to let us have conversations without adults there. I think maybe there was one or two adults who might have sat in on the conversations, but I think that was, that's something a bit different for us that we don't normally do. And then the last sort of quite interesting, surprising finding was that all the different groups that we spoke to talked about these perceived threats, and particularly because of the media interest in ISIS and the cases of attack and rape and things. All the different groups really felt a real threat, of security threat, particularly to their daughters. But actually, when we asked what are those threats and has anything actually ever happened, then people said, oh no, it's quite safe around here. So it's kind of interesting that all those groups were having the same thoughts, whereas actually they might not have been really embedded in real findings. And then, Corey, I was going to hand over to you.
Yeah, so as Jude said, we had these findings from the CLARA assessment that we did, and this was before we actually began implementation of this UNDP project that Oxfam had in Eastern Iraq. And the question that we were really asking is, how can we safely involve women in cash for work? Cash for work, up until that point, we haven't involved women, but we really wanted to try and increase the household purchasing power for women in particular, because some research that we'd done had shown that there was direct correlation between a woman's ability to have a say and to make decisions in her household and also community, and her ability to provide income. So we really wanted to, where possible, directly involve women in cash for work so that they didn't have men acting on their behalf, and therefore that decision-making ability was reduced. But we also wanted to do it in a way which was safe. And a key finding from the CLARA was that in the environment of insecurity and, with areas having been held by ISIS and people, experiencing increased social tension, that actually men in particular had been restricting women's mobility. And we really wanted to try and find cash for work activities that took that into consideration and didn't, discount that, but also meant that women could actively participate in cash for work. And I have there on the slide the 3 objectives of cash for work in general, which are to also, as well as increase household purchasing power, to promote social cohesion, which is obviously really important in the context that I've described, but also to help rebuild community assets. So what we went about doing with this in mind was holding focus groups separately with men and women, and we managed to get to a situation where the women said we'd feel comfortable inside our homes, or homes that have been rebuilt since areas were liberated from Islamic State. We'd feel comfortable painting inside. We'd feel comfortable doing cleaning of community buildings. And also, where men were engaging in physical labour outside, restoring community assets, we could cook for those men. So we checked with the communities, and everyone was kind of on board, and the women were able to engage with this. And actually, from previous Cash for Work programming, where we had 0% women's participation, we went on to have 18%, participation of women, which was quite significant. And all the women who we spoke to afterwards said that they felt safe. They felt that their decision to take part was one that was kind of respected. And they felt that it was better for them to get the money directly rather than nominating a boy or a man to work on their behalf, because they had kind of a greater portion of the cash. And we had some really interesting things that money was spent on as well. So we had women, you know, we know, and things that came out of the CLARA, that women take a larger percentage of their time engaging in unpaid care work. We had women that spent their money on buying washing machines. We had some women, again, you know, we'd identified some GBV cases, and we had some women that used the money to fund lawyers in order to divorce their husbands, which is quite controversial, but actually I think that's great. You know, we're putting cash in the hands of women that need it, and we are giving them a certain ownership over it because they were able to do the work themselves. So certainly doing a tool like the CLARA really helped us to understand the dynamics in these communities and to tailor our programming in order to kind of make sure that we don't exacerbate social tensions, but also that we do no harm and that we do safe programming.
Okay, and then just moving on to how Oxfam will incorporate the CLARA into, you know, well, how Oxfam will take CLARA forward, how we envisage using it in our work. I mean, Oxfam generally, we mainstream protection and gender throughout our humanitarian work. And this is to contribute to some of our global objectives, such as promoting women's leadership and participation in community-based structure, as well as you know, making sure that we do no harm in our activities. So I think we like to think that we do this fairly well, but actually I think the CLARA has probably helped us to realise that we do need to integrate these much better within our existing kind of technical tools. We often do separate gender analysis or separate power analysis, but so they don't necessarily come at the right time, or sometimes they'll take longer while we're deciding to do, while we've already decided what to do for our program activities. So I think it's, it's the need to make sure that our existing tools, so you're probably familiar with the 48-hour tool, which Oxfam was part of a consortium to develop, to assess our post-emergency, the food security and livelihood situation. But it is more of a rapid tool rather than looking longer term. So the idea is that we can take that to the sort of the next stage of maybe a bit more of livelihoods recovery, but really make sure that, particularly given the nature of conflicts and crises at the moment, the fact that the large majority of them are protracted crises in conflict areas, that incorporating protection and gender issues, particularly the issue of GBV, is really key, and we really need to make sure that we're asking the right questions, that we're not just kind of putting the questions down for the sake of it, that we really think about it. So I think that's probably the main way that we will be using the CLARA, because I think for us on its own, really the main questions are very focused just on GBV, but we need to use it much more to understand specific livelihoods. So we would include it with asking other questions as, what type of assets do people have, what access to financial institutions, what access to land, what type of crops do they grow. So we need to incorporate it into all of those. But hopefully it will just help to really strengthen our focus and our commitments to protection and gender. That's it from me.
Thank you, Jude. We're now going to pass to Michael at Nursery Car.
Hi, Michael and Hajara. Are you having issues with the sound?
From my end, everything is fine.
Go ahead then. Great.
Michael, are you there?
Okay. I am addressing Michael's problems with his sound. Hold on one moment. Just bear with us. Okay. All right, Michael, are you here with us?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, with you now. So good afternoon. It's awesome to be part of this discussion for us to share our experiences from Nigeria, so that just so that you understand the context in which Mexico is working in the northeastern part of Nigeria. The insurgency that started in 2009 in 2014, which resulted in over 2.5 million people living in displacement away from their places of origin. Mexico responded to the emergency situation when a section of the northeastern part of Nigeria became accessible. And Mexico on the onset provided the initial interventions in the form of food assistance, household items, and then we initiated livelihood support to a section of the displaced persons in the northeast of Nigeria. Now, while we were aware that there are vulnerabilities and then concerns in some of the communities, especially around vulnerable persons, in this sense, over 60% of those that are living in displacement are either children or women, and they fall under the most vulnerable persons with a lot of risks associated with even the way we provide interventions to them. So our foremost concern was to identify how we can provide support to this section of persons that are vulnerable, and then do it in such a way that we do not cause more harm. And the introduction of CLARA helped us in providing visibility to some of the risks and vulnerabilities in the communities where we providing support to. And when we started the livelihood interventions there, identifying those that would participate in the program there, we, through the CLARA approach, we have been able to identify how we can implement our programs better, and in such a way that we are able to mitigate some of the risks associated with the support we provide to different groups there, women, young girls, men, and of course boys. After the initial piloting of the tool and the insights that we obtained from it, sharing the initial finding both internally and with the immediate stakeholders there, it created a lot of interest from both international partners and then governments. With that interest and insights, we were motivated to go beyond the pilots to test that particular tool in a new area in the Northeast that has become accessible. We utilize it in the initial assessment, which helps us in developing a proposal, and we are currently implementing a program there. So to date, we have been able to reach over 4,000 households in a section of the Northeast, and we have utilized the tool at the moment beyond just livelihood interventions. We have also used it to see how the other interventions and support we have been providing to displaced persons and then vulnerable persons within host communities, both our food support, cash for work activities that we have been doing. The tool has assisted us in identifying some of the risks that are likely going to be associated with those activities and interventions that we have been providing to the community. At this juncture, I would like to pass on to my colleague Hajara, who will take off from me. Thank you. Hajara? Hello, Hajara? Okay.
Hajra, are you there? Are you able to chime in? Hajra, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. I had to
Oh,
listen
okay.
to.
Great. Oh, okay. Take it away.
Thank you, Tenzin and Michael. Nursery Car Pilot in Nigeria, how did it go? Initially, I really thought it's not going to work because the CLARA tool is a kind of a tool that's a kind of a bit complicated. That's how I look at it. But after a while, I now understood that it's really an interesting tool. I was thinking, how can we kind of bring together adolescent girls and also adolescent boys to a kind of conduct focus group discussion. For the women, it's fine and men, but adolescent girls, so that's a question that I asked myself. But after the training of the enumerators and looking at the approach and how it works, so it became so interesting that okay, this is a tool that's really Mexico needs to a kind of design and implement a program. CLARA Tool came to us when we've already started livelihood implementation. So it was like for men and only women. So we didn't look at adolescent boys and also adolescent girls. But with the help of the CLARA, we now re-strategize to see how adolescent boys and girls can also a kind of benefit from the livelihood program. And the CLARA methodology was so interesting in the sense that we have 4 communities where we selected, 2 out of which were urban and 2 were rural. So this mix-up helped us to really understand what kind of activities can be done in a rural setting and which one can be done in the urban setting. And looking at the fact that hosts and IDPs were actually our major targets, so women, boys, girls, and men. So it became very interesting. 16 data collectors were trained on protection, gender, GBV, and ethical data collection, which really helped us to really understand what CLARA is all about. So, what did we find? Our major findings. Uh, what we kind of find was okay, livelihood are more diversified than previously assessed. Yes, initially it was just a kind of an activity. We just assessed activity for men and women, leaving out adolescent boys and girls. So now we really understood that there are different activities for boys, girls, men, and women, which makes it very interesting. Each each of the cohorts wanted a collective business. Like, okay, the adolescent boys really want something different, adolescent girls want something different. And when you look at it, you look at there are similarities in all what they want, which makes CLARA very interesting. Looking at the insurgency in the northeast part of Nigeria, it's a kind of limited movement which impacts livelihood opportunities. So there are a kind of livelihood activity that some people can really not do in in a particular setting that they are. So it limits the way they, due to the movement, it limits the opportunities which they have. Adolescent girls, we now understood that really this is happening. Initially, we thought it's a kind of muted and there is nothing like that happening. But we now understood that really sex, exchange of sex for goods or for cash do exist. And this exists as a negative coping mechanism, not really because they really want to do it, but it's an alternative livelihood because they have to survive. So this takes us to how will Mexico take CLARA forward. This is so interesting. Initially, like I said, after a while, we're like, okay, CLARA can really be taken forward. So what we do is we really did CLARA in Borno State, aside the pilot that was done in Gombe. And this was done unaided, like Mexico took the lead on it, and we did the assessment successful. So the only slight difference we have was in Gombe, really, it's okay for adolescent girls to gather for a discussion and also adolescent boys to gather for discussion. But in the other parts, which is Borno, it's really crazy for you to gather adolescent boys and girls, like for a focus group discussion. Their caregivers are not comfortable allowing the adolescent girls to kind of go away for a focus group discussion. This is a kind of a bit challenging at the initial stage. But looking at how the Mexico program is, we involve our community leaders and major stakeholders. So this helps us to kind of be able to do the CLARA assessment. The CLARA tool was a bit adjusted. Looking at the context, it's similar, but there are slight differences. So we adjusted some questions to really suit the context, which means some certain questions that we asked in Gombe were really adjusted for the ones in Borno. CLARA assessment really a kind of impacted Mexico in the sense that now it's done in the design stage for Borno State. Looking at we're trying to have a livelihood program in Borno for adolescent boys and girls. So we also have a livelihood program for women and men. So this is really helpful to kind of start up our program design. Yeah, there is one interesting part which makes CLARA very important in M&E, in the sense that we are able to incorporate some risk questions during the monitoring. There is a 3 to 6 month monitoring that was done by Mexico. We incorporated questions to really understood what were the risks beneficiaries faced or participants faced in implementation. And we're able to come up with this. For instance, we never knew that hawking is a kind of attached to a risk. So we now realize that, of course, there's GBV can be attached to a kind of hawking. So adolescent girls take goods from one place to other. They kind of, it poses a threat to them. And this is really a GBV issue. Yes, at this point, I would like to give it back to Kim. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hadra. This is Tenzin, actually. So we're now going to turn it over to a Q&A, and we welcome questions from all of our participants. You can type your question into the chat box, and we will moderate your questions, and we'll all chime in to answer. Great. So the first question that we've received is it possible to integrate parts of these tools into existing resources? This is a great question, and I think Jude touched on this a bit. The Women's Refugee Commission has developed the CLARA tool exactly for that reason, to be integrated into existing tools and approaches. That's why they're modular, so practitioners can pull from the questions or add new questions, adapting phrasing and probes to context. And they can be paired in concert with a variety of existing tools. I mentioned the Emma earlier. Again, Jude mentioned the 48-hour tool. It could be paired with CARE's rapid gender analysis tool and many others. The second question is a bit similar. How can we adapt these tools to different settings? So as we did in Iraq in the first pilot, and in Nursery Car in the second pilot, the livelihood staff looked at the tools, changed the phrasing and the probes for context. So looking at what are the common livelihoods activities practiced in that area. If it was a rural area, the probes and questions were adapted to farming, trading, labor, shepherding, for example, whereas if it was in a different context, it could be adapted appropriately. Okay. The next question is, if I'm planning a livelihoods program, how can I get technical support? So the Women's Refugee Commission is certainly available to provide any TA as you explore the CLARA guidance and tools, and we're happy to offer support. In addition, Oksana and Mercy Car now are experts in CLARA and can also provide some guidance as to how it's been used in different contexts. Okay, we have another question. Is it possible to use some of the CLARA tools in gender analysis for non-livelihoods related programs? Michael, is it okay if I pass to you, because you mentioned that Mercy Car has done this in Nigeria. On my end, I think that being able to ask about the risk and protection strategies, not just about livelihoods, but about any type of intervention across sectors, is certainly a wise move and needed. Michael, are you there?
Just like I mentioned earlier on, we've been able to get insights into other areas of intervention like our food support. Specifically the cash for work activity, which involves both men, women, and then the elderly, different categories of people in the communities there. So it has provided us with insights into how we can get everyone involved in the activity without causing harm. So we have directed that also at how we provide intervention, both food and household items. Considering the fact that we have, as part of our program beneficiaries, female-headed households and then child-headed households. We have so many of them as part of our program participants. So we have tried to have an insight into how such supports have been provided, whether they make positive impact on those category of people, and the CLARA tool have helped us to have insights, provided visibility into how we can involve such persons effectively. Over to you, Tenzin.
Great. Thank you, Michael. The next question is, how have the tools evolved as we've been testing them in different contexts? So they've evolved quite a bit. In the guidance, there's actually a nice summary of the lessons learned and how the tools have been adapted along the way. But we've changed them both in terms of adding additional questions. For example, in Iraq, we added the question on youth participation in livelihoods to help us identify their direct or indirect participation and associated risks. And in Nigeria, we added a question on exchange of sex for goods, services, or cash to try to get at this a bit more. But I invite you all to certainly look at the guidance, and you can see all the adaptations we've made along the way. Okay, so we have a question for Oxfam, Jude or Corey. Either of you want to take this one. The question is, was it difficult to get members of the 1,000 plus households to answer questions honestly? Was there any way to check the answers? And on average, how long did an interview take with a household?
Sorry, Tenzin, but actually neither of us were there for the actual interviews, but I think you were. Do you remember?
Yep, happy to jump in. So the sampling wasn't with all of the community, and what we did to kind of check answers was at the end of the assessment we held community validation meetings in each of the villages, and we shared findings back kind of for validation. And some of the answers then were revised a bit based on that process. In terms of how long an interview takes on average, initially I would say about an hour, but after that, enumerators get used to it and maybe 20 minutes. And for focus group discussions, I think, the first one out of the gate, maybe an hour and a half, but then gets cut down to, 45 minutes or an hour. So we have another question on how the tools can be used in different contexts, in refugee camps versus in urban settings or in settlements. Again, the tools are intended to be adapted to context, so programmers who are most familiar with the community can adapt the tools. But whether in camps or in urban settings, the risk associated with livelihood should be identified, as well as the protection strategies, though they'll certainly vary in each of those contexts. Okay, we have another question about kind of staffing and HR capacity in order to do this. So the question is, for the people you worked with to facilitate the focus group discussions, what skills did they have, relationships to the community? What were the hardest things to train? This is a great question. And I'd just like to add here that in the guidance, there's quite detailed tips for HR and training, etc. So I invite you to check those out. But this varied by pilot. So in Iraq, it was primarily enumerators who were hired temporarily for the assessment, whereas with Nursery Car in Nigeria, it was a mix of staff and community volunteers. And it varied whether or not people had prior experience with focus group and interview facilitation. What we did for the training was we did a 2-day training. Hajra referenced this earlier, kind of 101 of livelihoods, 101 of protection, 101 of ethical data collection, facilitation. So that really depends on the group that you're working with. Great, so there's a question about kind of assessment fatigue, which certainly is something to be aware of. The question is, how often should gender risk analysis be conducted and repeated in a community using the CLARA tool? And as it takes a long time, the community might be overwhelmed going through long questionnaires and exercises. Do you have any feedback on this tool from the community? So first, to address the first part of the question, we want to be able to use the CLARA tool during assessment, but to be able to integrate questions on risks related to livelihood and whether risk mitigation strategies are being effective throughout the program cycle. So Hajra mentioned earlier these kinds of questions being integrated into monitoring tools, which then would be rolled out during the regular monitoring cycle. So hopefully would not create any assessment fatigue because it's integrated into the regular implementation plan. And in terms of if it would be overwhelming for communities, I think in most places, folks were very grateful to have the opportunity to discuss this and really saw it of value to be able to talk about their risks and wanted to share how they keep themselves safe, how programs can be most appropriate for them. And because staff are conducting the focus groups or the interviews, I don't think that it's really fatiguing for them. In terms of feedback on the tool from community, we had in Nigeria several members of the community as our enumerators, and this was the same in South Sudan with a separate pilot that we haven't discussed today. And they really asserted the value of the tool, that there had been no consultations about the risks or the protection strategies before, and that they saw that as really essential to receiving safe assistance. Okay, so I have a question for Corey. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit further on the cash for work and how it was informed by the CLARA. The question is, how did Oxfam change its approach and implementation strategy based on findings from the CLARA? Perhaps you'd like to elaborate a little bit more on that.
Really sorry, the line went a bit funny then, to maybe repeat the question, but just before that, maybe I can just add on how the community saw some of the questions. I think that especially in Iraq, in such sensitive communities, I think when we were going to villages that we'd never been to before, and I think the first thing that we start talking to them about was GBV, and I think that might have probably taken them a bit by surprise. So it might be a bit, and I wasn't there, so I didn't add it in. But I think maybe, I don't know if you adapted that or what you did about that, but I think maybe it just needs to be a little bit sort of more gentle at the beginning, especially with new communities, and just to bear that in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Jude. I think it's a good point to consider what are the relationships between the agency and the community as you're starting to discuss sensitive topics. What we did along the way throughout the pilots was work very carefully with the language, with program staff, including national staff, and enumerators, to make sure that language was, sensitive enough, wouldn't be off-putting, and to try to create an open dialogue about these issues. Corey, is there anything you'd like to add to what you shared earlier about cash for work?
So I didn't actually hear the question. If you could repeat the question, I'm very happy to add.
Sure. So the question is, how did Oxfam change its approach or implementation strategy based on findings from the CLARA?
Right. So as I said, we up until that point had just been doing cash for work, where we'd been targeting men. So, for example, if we had a female-headed household, the woman would have likely nominated a man on her behalf to do the physical work. But because, we've been having these discussions about how it should be kind of the CLARA and, so we'd been also doing a gender analysis where, like I said, we found out that, you know, women, their ability to make decisions was significantly hampered by the fact that they themselves didn't contribute financially to the household. We started saying, you know, how can we do that? But then we had these findings from the CLARA that said, actually, given the security situation, given the crisis, that, you know, it was difficult for women to go out and that men were significantly restricting women's mobility. So, for example, in some countries, and maybe this is the case in Nigeria, you know, Oxfam will implement cash to work programs where there will be men and women and they'll be out in public, engaged in some sort of unskilled activity to get some cash. Whereas in Iraq, I mean, number one, culturally, mixing men and women was an absolute no-no. But also, given the security situation, women felt that whereas maybe in the past they might have been open to kind of working out in the fields or something for cash to work, they felt, and also the men in the community felt, that it was unsafe for them to do so. So having got that information from the CLARA assessment, that's how we came about having these conversations and ended up doing effectively indoor cash for work for the women, if that makes sense.
Great, thank you, Corey. Given that we want to be respectful of everyone's time, we'll try to email answers to remaining questions that haven't been addressed yet. But if you have any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, please feel free to email me. My email is Tenzin, M-T-E-N-Z-I-N-M @WRCOMMISSION.org, tenzinm@WRCcommission.org. And feel free to tune in tomorrow to our webinar on adolescent girls and safer livelihoods, also with Oxfam focusing on our integrated pilot in South Sudan, integrating the CLARA and the I'm Here approach. You can register for that by going to our website, and you can access the revised CLARA tools and guidance on our resources page. And we'd like to thank all of you for participating, for asking and answering wonderful questions. And thank you so much to our panelists, Michael, Hajra, Corey, and Julie. And thank you very much from myself and Women's Refugee Commission.